It started like any other Wednesday. I remember because it was a warm day in late September, the sun spilling across the courtyard like it always did. I was halfway through my junior year and, like everyone else, I was used to the humdrum of school life. The sound of sneakers squeaking on the polished floors, the low murmur of voices, and the occasional shout from a teacher trying to corral a group of rowdy freshmen. Nothing about that morning suggested anything unusual, at least until the announcement came. Attention, students and staff. We are initiating a lockdown. Please proceed to your nearest classroom and remain inside. This is not a drill. The voice crackled over the PA system, flat and monotone, almost robotic in its delivery. I froze mid-step in the hallway outside my history class. My first thought was of a fire drill gone wrong, but the voice's lack of urgency told me otherwise. Panic began to swell, quiet but insistent like water rising behind a dam. I reached my classroom where Ms. Hartford was already ushering students in. Her eyes were wide, but she tried to smile. "Just stay calm," she said. But her hands shook so violently that I could see the tremor even from across the room. We locked the door, drew the blinds, and huddled near the windows. Some kids whispered, speculating about a shooter or some other disaster. Others sat frozen, staring at the floor. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. It was impossible to tell. Every second stretched unbearably. The only sounds were the occasional cough, the scratch of a pen, and the muffled cries of younger students down the hall. That's when the noises began. At first it was subtle, a soft scratching, like nails running along the walls. I thought it might be rats or a maintenance worker somewhere in the building. But then came the breathing. Slow, deliberate, not human, like someone exhaling through a cracked door somewhere just out of sight. I froze, trying to convince myself it was a trick of my imagination. But the scratching grew louder, and now I could hear faint footsteps moving outside the door, pacing in a rhythm that felt almost deliberate. Somewhere behind me, a student whimpered. Ms. Hartford's hand shot up, silencing us, and we all listened. The footsteps stopped abruptly. A heavy dragging sound followed, like someone sliding their feet across the floor, then silence. Minutes, or hours, passed. I lost track. My phone had no signal. The clock on the wall didn't move. And then the first scream came. Not from a student, not from a teacher, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere I couldn't place. The sound was raw, animalistic, full of pain and fury. It echoed through the hallways, bouncing off the walls, growing closer with each heartbeat. "Stay down," Ms. Hartford hissed. Her usual composure was gone, replaced with fear so palpable it made my stomach churn. I pressed myself against the corner, watching the door, straining to see through the blinds. Shadows flickered in the hallway outside. They weren't normal shadows. They stretched, warped, as if the walls themselves were breathing. Then the lights went out. The room plunged into darkness, and the temperature dropped. I could see my own breath fogging in front of me. Whimpering began from every corner of the classroom. The sound of dragging, slow and deliberate, returned closer this time. And then I heard it, a voice low and guttural, muttering something I couldn't understand. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything human. And yet it was speaking in a language I somehow recognized, though I'd never heard it before. My instinct was to run, but there was nowhere to go. The windows were sealed, the door locked, and the hallway outside was filled with those things. I can't describe them fully, not with words anyone would understand. They weren't solid, but they weren't entirely invisible. A blur of darkness with glowing points where eyes should be. They moved with impossible speed, yet their steps were deliberate, careful. We huddled together, every one of us frozen, listening as they circled our classroom. And then they stopped. Silence again. The kind of silence that feels alive, pressing against your skin. And then the whispering started again, now coming from inside the room, though no one moved. I felt my mind unravel. Students began crying, some whispering prayers, others screaming for their parents. I pressed my hands over my ears, hoping to block it out. When I finally dared to peek, I saw one of my classmates sitting across the room. But it wasn't him. His face was twisted, elongated in ways that should be impossible. His eyes black voids, his mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. He spoke, though the words were unintelligible, and the sound made my skin crawl. I screamed, and the lights flickered back on. Everything was normal, or at least as normal as it could be. My classmate was sitting there perfectly normal, looking terrified and confused. The PA system crackled, and the same monotone voice came over. Lockdown lifted. Please remain calm and follow staff instructions. We unlocked the doors, filed out, and made our way to the gymnasium where the rest of the students were gathered. Police and emergency personnel were there, checking on everyone. Nothing had been found. No one reported seeing anything. No trace of anyone or anything was outside the locked classrooms. I left that day feeling hollow, my stomach in knots. My friends and I tried to laugh it off, attributing it to fear and imagination. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. Weeks later, I learned that a student from another wing of the school went missing during the lockdown. Officially, they said he had run off, maybe got lost, maybe panicked. But I know better. I heard his scream. I heard them whisper his name. And sometimes at night, when I'm alone in my room, I swear I can still hear scratching outside my door. Slow, deliberate, waiting. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it's still there. All I know is that something happened that day. Something that no one believes and no one can explain. And every time I think I've moved past it, every time I convince myself it was all in my head, I remember the darkness, the whispers, and the eyes, and I know I'll never truly be safe again. I still remember the day like it happened yesterday, even though it's been years. It was my sophomore year, a Friday morning that felt like any other. I had just gotten my schedule for the semester and was heading to my first class, English Literature, when the announcements came. Attention, all students, we are initiating a full lockdown. Please move to your nearest classroom immediately. This is not a drill. I froze mid-step in the hallway outside the cafeteria. Lockdowns weren't unheard of at our school, but they usually ended quickly, 10 minutes at most, with nothing ever found. This one felt different. The voice was flat, but there was a tension behind it I couldn't place. I hurried into my classroom, slamming the door behind me, and Ms. Barrett, my English teacher, instructed everyone to stay calm. We drew the blinds, locked the door, and sat on the floor near our desks. Initially, it was almost boring. Students whispered nervously, texting friends and parents, trying to find any scrap of news. I remember thinking how surreal it was, how strange it felt that life could stop so abruptly, leaving us trapped in a room that had always felt safe. That illusion of safety shattered within the first hour. I was staring at the whiteboard when I noticed something odd. A faint shadow moved across the corner of the room, flickering like a reflection from a passing car. I blinked, but it stayed there, just out of focus. Did anyone else see that? I whispered to the student next to me. She shook her head, her face pale. I felt a chill creep up my spine, the kind that makes your teeth chatter for no reason. Then the scratching began. Low, irregular, coming from the walls themselves, or maybe the floor. It was impossible to tell. Some students laughed nervously, but I couldn't move my eyes from that shadow. It wasn't human. It didn't behave like a human would. It slid across the corner of the room, barely there, yet unmistakably watching us. Minutes, or was it hours, passed. The scratching grew louder, accompanied by soft whispers that seemed to emanate from nowhere. At first it was like faint murmurs, almost like students whispering secrets, but then the words became clearer, and that's when I felt my mind snap. The voice or voices were calling my name, not just mine. They were calling the names of everyone in the room. Michael, Emily, Jason, find us. No one else reacted, or if they did, I didn't notice. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to convince myself it was my imagination. But I could feel it. Something was in the room with us, moving through the air like smoke, bending the light and shadows unnaturally. Then the classroom began to change. I swear it. The walls seemed to stretch, subtly at first, and then more obviously. The windows, once looking out over the empty courtyard, now showed a hallway I didn't recognize. Long, dimly lit, with doors that didn't exist on our floor plan. The whiteboard melted into a shifting black surface, like ink spreading over paper. My classmates didn't notice, or maybe they did, but their expressions were blank, unseeing. I ran to the door, locked. The blinds wouldn't budge. The lights flickered. I could hear footsteps on the other side, slow, deliberate, echoing in a space that didn't exist. I pounded on the door, screaming for someone, anyone, to let me out. Nothing. And then the figure appeared. At first I thought it was another student, a prankster maybe, trying to scare me. But as it stepped into the corner of my eye, I realized it wasn't human. Its form was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs bending at angles they shouldn't. Its face, I can't describe it in words that would make sense. It was a void, black as tar, with faint flickers of red where its eyes should have been. It tilted, its head toward me, and I felt it see through me, into places in my mind I didn't know existed. I fell back against the wall, tripping over a chair. My classmates, still frozen in place, didn't react. The creature advanced slowly, gliding rather than walking. The whispers escalated into voices, screaming now, overlapping in a cacophony of agony and hate. "Join us. Stay with us. Forever." I grabbed the phone from my pocket. No signal. The clock on the wall had stopped. Panic clawed at my chest. I thought if I just stayed calm, if I just didn't look at it, maybe it would go away. But it didn't. Suddenly, the shadow split. Multiple figures appeared surrounding the room. They weren't solid. They shimmered, barely there, like smoke or mist. But with intention. Every step they took was measured, precise, as if they were hunting. I could feel their awareness of me, pressing against my skin like icy fingers. Ms. Barrett screamed. Her voice sounded wrong, distorted, like it had been slowed down. I couldn't recognize it as hers. The other students remained frozen. I realized with horror that they weren't asleep. They weren't there. They were projections. Copies. Empty shells. I ran to the corner of the room, trying to hide. My mind raced. Why me? Why now? I remember whispering, crying, screaming, trying to make sense of what was happening. The shadows loomed closer, and I could feel the air thicken around me. Then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. The classroom snapped back to normal. The walls, the windows, the desks, all as they had been before. Ms. Barrett and the students looked at me, confusion on their faces. "Michael?" she asked. "Are you okay? You've been staring for hours." I tried to explain, but the words felt useless. "The classroom and the shadows," I stammered. She shook her head gently. "It's fine. Lockdown's over. You're safe now." Safe. The word made my stomach twist. I left school that day in a daze, my parents asking questions I couldn't answer. I wanted to tell someone, anyone, but what could I say? That I'd been trapped in a room that didn't exist, haunted by things that defied reality? No one would believe me. I never went back to that classroom willingly. Every time I passed the door, my stomach turned. I avoided English class, made excuses, skipped school days if I had to. But sometimes late at night I hear it. The whispering. Faint at first, growing louder, calling my name. Sometimes I swear I can see the shadows again, stretching in the corner of my room, waiting for me to enter, to join them. I've tried to rationalize it. Stress, sleep deprivation, fear. But the memory is too vivid, too visceral. And I know the truth. That day, the classroom ceased to exist as it should have, and I glimpsed something else. Something ancient, something patient, something that waits for the next person unlucky enough to be trapped in a school that isn't entirely real. Even now, years later, I can't shake it. Sometimes I see that hallway in my dreams. Sometimes I hear Miss Barrett's distorted scream. And every time I think it was just imagination, I remember the cold, the whispers, the eyes that saw all of me, and I know it wasn't imagination. The shadows are still there, waiting. I still remember the day the school almost swallowed me whole. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was running late to third period. The hallways were buzzing with students, lockers slamming, teachers shouting reminders, the usual chaos that made high school feel alive. Nothing about that morning suggested that it would be the day my world tilted into something unrecognizable. Then the announcement came. Attention. Lockdown in effect. All students and staff, please follow lockdown procedures immediately. I had heard it dozens of times before. Fire drills, false alarms, routine lockdowns. But the tone this time, flat, clipped, urgent, made my stomach knot. My classmates exchanged worried glances. Some whispered, "Maybe it's a shooter." Others laughed nervously, trying to mask fear with humor. I ran to the nearest classroom, a biology lab I didn't usually attend. Miss Thompson, the teacher, motioned for everyone inside, her face pale, lips pressed together tight. We locked the door and huddled behind the tables, drawing the blinds. At first it was normal. The low hum of students murmuring, the occasional cough, the faint scratching of pencil on paper. Then the lights flickered. I remember looking up and thinking it was a loose bulb or a wiring issue, but the flicker became rhythmic like a heartbeat, and the shadows in the corners of the room began to move independently of the objects that cast them. It started small, a twitch here, a flicker there, but it grew. I could see shapes forming in the darkness. Figures of students I didn't recognize, tall and thin, with faces blurred as if smeared in paint. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. The first scream came from the hallway. It wasn't human. It was guttural, a sound that vibrated in your chest and made your teeth ache. We all froze. The scratching, the whispers, everything stopped for a moment, like the building itself was holding its breath. Then the door rattled. I swear I saw the lock twisting, even though we had done it ourselves. The rattling grew into pounding, and a voice I would never forget, whispered through the cracks. My own name. Not my full name, just my first name, drawn out, slow, hungry. I dropped to the floor, heart hammering. The figures from the shadows began to creep closer, drifting silently across the room. They weren't walking. They were gliding, almost hovering, defying physics. Their faces, I don't have words. Eyes black as void, mouths stretching into impossible shapes, limbs bending in ways no human body should. Ms. Thompson screamed, but her voice sounded wrong. Distorted, echoing as if multiple versions of her were screaming at once. She tried to corral us to a corner, but the shadows moved faster than we could react. I felt them brushing past me, cold, wet, like smoke wrapping around my skin. One of the shadows paused. It turned its head slowly toward me. I felt it see me, and in that gaze was every fear I had ever felt amplified 100-fold. My mind wanted to run, my body wanted to freeze, and I realized I was caught in a place where instinct didn't work. And then the classroom shifted. The walls stretched upward, groaning like they were alive. The ceiling warped into darkness that seemed infinite. The fluorescent lights flickered and died, plunging the room into a void. The window showed nothing but a black expanse dotted with strange, glowing red shapes that moved in patterns too precise, too intelligent to be random. I ran to the door, desperate. It didn't budge. I could hear footsteps outside, dragging, slow, deliberate. The whispers returned, now a chorus chanting in a language that clawed at my mind, burning like acid. Then I saw her. Not Ms. Thompson, the real her, but a shadowy replica. Twisted, elongated, her mouth split open in a grin that made my stomach turn. She raised her hand, pointing at me. I couldn't move. My legs refused to obey. The whispers intensified, calling me forward, promising safety if I would just step into the darkness. Something inside me screamed no, and I forced myself to crawl backward. My classmates, or whatever had replaced them, were frozen statues, their faces turned toward me. Eyes black voids, mouths silently screaming. I realized in horror that if I touched them, I might join them, become one of them. The shadows outside the door shifted, and I knew they were waiting, patient, intelligent. They didn't need to attack, they were enough just to exist, to warp reality, to make you question everything. I heard a sound behind me, a dragging, shuffling movement. Something circled the room slowly, ensuring I stayed cornered, trapped, alive, but helpless. I don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes? Hours? Days? Time ceased to exist. And then, as suddenly as it began, everything snapped back. The walls, the windows, the fluorescent lights, they were normal again. Ms. Thompson was standing at the front of the room, her face calm as if nothing had happened. The announcement came over the PA. Lockdown lifted. All students, please resume normal activities. I left the classroom in a daze. Everyone was outside, talking, laughing, moving as if nothing had happened. I tried to explain, tried to warn someone, but my words fell flat. No one remembered screaming. No one remembered shadows. No one remembered time stopping. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in my house, every whisper of wind made me think the shadows had followed me home. I looked in the mirror and swore for a moment I saw something behind me. Just a flicker, a movement in the corner of my eye. I blinked and it was gone. Days passed, weeks. Life resumed its normal rhythm, but I could feel it lurking, waiting. I tried to forget, to rationalize, to convince myself it had been fear, exhaustion, imagination. But every time I hear a sudden noise, every time I see a shadow stretch at the wrong angle, my heart pounds. And I remember the darkness that waited for me in that classroom. I never returned to that school willingly, and sometimes late at night I get a call. No one is on the other end, but I hear the whispers. My name, drawn out, hungry, impatient. The last bell never rang that day, and I don't think it ever will. Something in that school changed that day, something that no one can see, no one can stop. And I know that if I ever go back, even for a second, it will claim me. It's still waiting.